It was supposed to be a tense but civil discussion on American legacy and patriotism, held at the Grand Lincoln Auditorium in Washington, D.C., where celebrities, lawmakers, veterans, and educators were invited to speak on the cultural divide that had been growing across the country. The panel was broadcast live and heavily publicized with the intention of bringing diverse voices together. Among them sat Denzel Washington, actor, producer, and outspoken advocate for dignity, education, and generational wisdom, quietly seated in his tailored Navy suit, calmly reviewing his notes before the broadcast began. To his left sat Karoline Leavitt, the young, brash political firebrand known more for her confrontational rhetoric than her legislative achievements. Leavitt had gained notoriety for positioning herself as a crusader against what she often labeled Hollywood elitism. And the moment she learned Denzel would be on the panel, insiders whispered that she saw it as her perfect opportunity to make a name for herself, not through policy, but through provocation. The event began modestly, with each speaker offered a 5-minute opening statement. Denzel's was calm, measured, reflective. He spoke not from a place of superiority, but from experience, about growing up in a working-class household, his mother's sacrifices, his father's discipline, and how personal responsibility and community upliftment had guided him. The crowd was moved, some even applauding mid-speech, but Karoline's eyes didn't flinch. When her turn came, she leaned into the microphone with a smile that barely masked her contempt. What followed wasn't a rebuttal, it was a targeted strike. She accused Denzel by name of being out of touch with real America, called his comments Hollywood fluff, and then, in the moment that would freeze the room and break the internet, said, "You can sit down, boy. This isn't a movie." The silence that followed was almost unnatural. The moderator's eyes widened. A producer backstage nearly tripped over a cable. Even Leavitt's own aides looked at each other in stunned disbelief. Denzel didn't react immediately. He didn't rise. He didn't respond with rage. He simply blinked once and set his note cards down on the table. What followed was not a viral rant, not a shouting match. What followed was something far more powerful, a controlled demolition of arrogance with the calm precision of a man who had nothing to prove. "I wasn't aware," Denzel said slowly, his voice deep and unshaken, "that addressing a crowd about the importance of dignity required your permission." His words rang out with such clarity and composure that the audience visibly leaned forward. "You're speaking to me as if I were beneath you," he continued, "but I'm old enough to have earned my seat at this table, and I don't ask for validation from anyone who's still trying to figure out how to listen." The crowd murmured. Leavitt stiffened, but Denzel hadn't finished. "You see, disrespect doesn't make you stronger. It makes you smaller. Calling someone boy in this space, in this moment, in front of these people, it doesn't diminish me. It exposes you, and if you can't see that, it's not because the lights are too bright. It's because the room is full of mirrors." The auditorium exploded, not in outrage, but in stunned applause. Even some of Leavitt's fellow panelists clapped, not in partisanship, but in reverence. The camera captured everything. Karoline's expression curdled from smugness to pale discomfort, while Denzel remained still, hands folded, not smug but solemn. His words didn't need a mic drop. They were already echoing. Backstage, producers began fielding phone calls from journalists and influencers. Social media had already begun boiling. Within 10 minutes, the clip was viral. "Sit Down Boy" was trending alongside Denzel Speaks. On conservative radio, some tried to spin the moment as scripted theater. But even right-wing commentators admitted that Leavitt had crossed a line that no amount of spin could unpaint. Denzel's refusal to match disrespect with disrespect became the headline. His restraint was seen as power. His words, replayed and subtitled in every format, became the talking point of a country sick of petty sound bites. Schools began discussing it. Churches played the clip during sermons about grace and patience. Even foreign news outlets picked up the story, not as tabloid fuel, but as an example of American discourse turning an ugly corner. The media tried to book Denzel for follow-ups. He declined them all. Denzel's silence following the incident did not come from a place of evasion, but rather from intentional discipline. He knew the difference between going viral and making a legacy. The public, however, had no such patience for inaction. Within 24 hours, the event had become a national flashpoint, sparking protests on college campuses, endless debate on cable, news, and an avalanche of op-eds from every ideological corner. Civil rights historians were called in for context. Psychologists debated the effects of public humiliation and composure. Even corporate America weighed in, with companies issuing awkwardly worded statements, either supporting Denzel's grace under pressure or desperately distancing themselves from the confrontation altogether. Meanwhile, Leavitt's team scrambled to recover. Initially, they doubled down, with a spokesperson claiming her remark had been taken out of context, suggesting that she had meant boy as a casual expression. But the country wasn't buying it. Footage from other events began to resurface, revealing a pattern of veiled aggression in Leavitt's past public engagements. Moments once ignored or brushed aside now took on new weight. Her campaign donations began to dry up. Invitations to high-profile events were rescinded. Even some conservative allies went silent, unwilling to align with a controversy so toxic. But Leavitt, pride-wounded and hungry for redemption, booked herself on a string of late-night and podcast interviews in a desperate bid to reclaim the narrative. In each one, she insisted that she had merely spoken plainly and that Denzel had overreacted. Yet her tone betrayed her, a mixture of defensiveness and entitlement that only deepened the public's distaste. By contrast, Denzel appeared exactly once after the incident, 3 weeks later, at a town hall at his former high school in Mount Vernon, New York. There, surrounded by students and teachers who had grown up admiring him, he gave a speech not about the insult, but about how to handle moments of unexpected cruelty with poise. "You will be tested," he told the students. "Not when things go wrong, but when someone tries to pull you down with them. Don't go. Let them fall alone." The crowd gave a standing ovation. In that gymnasium, packed shoulder to shoulder, the chaos of cable news felt far away. But outside, the world was still talking. Universities added the exchange to their communications ethics curricula. Debate teams analyzed his rhetorical strategy. Even political opponents found themselves quoting him in debates, whether begrudgingly or in admiration. For a man who never raised his voice, Denzel had raised the temperature of the national conversation. His refusal to spiral into anger became a rare moment of unity across social lines, proving that moral strength wasn't a matter of volume, but of values. Meanwhile, Leavitt's career faltered. Her appearances were met with walkouts, her campaign speeches interrupted by chants of, "Sit down, boy," turned back at her like a boomerang she could never dodge. She eventually issued a written apology, buried on her website, vague and perfunctory, but the public had moved on. Not in forgetfulness, but in judgment. The cultural consensus had formed not from political alignment, but from a shared sense that something sacred had been violated and something noble had answered. What struck people wasn't just that Denzel had been disrespected, it was how he'd held the room with his integrity, refusing to match venom with venom. That was the shock. That was the lesson. In a time of noise, his silence thundered. His restraint spoke louder than rage. And in that stillness, America saw not just a celebrity defending his dignity, but a man reminding a fractured nation what real strength looks like, not in the insult, but in the answer.